students and the beginners who has just started the performance appraisal practice. So the performance appraisal is one of the most important practice in an organization. This is basically one of the driving factor for the satisfaction of the employees. Basically, all the employees they wait for the entire year for this exercise. Therefore, it's very important to implement this initiative properly in the organization. And to implement this, we need to understand what is performance appraisal, what are the different methods being followed, what are the different processes, and the principles and the process as well. So let me begin. So, what are the learning objectives of performance appraisal? It's like, it's the success factors in the group programs. What are the different key methods we are using in managing performance, and outline of the manager's subordinate interview. Now, if you are asking what is the performance appraisal purpose, so the primary goal is maintain organizational productivity, and also the method would be followed the individual performance and goals. The objectives is its opportunity to regularly discuss the results, supervisor identified strengths and weakness, and basis for the salary recommendation. It's also been used for any kind of training recommendations as well. The main purpose of the performance management is basically individual rewards. You need to understand the performance of an individual and also what are the feedbacks has been given to that person. If someone is performing pretty well, you should recognize the person as well, and definitely the documentation of the weak performer, so he should get an opportunity to improve the performance. And yes, some of the decision makings and future goal commitments. If someone is really performing well, what should be the future career path for that particular individual, or maybe for the organization as well. Now, the reason we do performance appraisal is obviously the number one reason is compensation. The compensation review of each and every individual, only through performance appraisal we can do that. Definitely evaluation of the performance in the job of an individual, the feedback of them, the documentation for decision, different goal setting, and also the promotion decision. Someone who is working in one designation for a long time, what should be the promotion and other related aspects. Definitely identifying the training needs. If a person is not performing properly, what are the training has to be implemented to that person, and the planning of the HR. Now, primary uses of performance appraisal is being described in this particular chart. It is different for small organization, large organization, and in fact all organization has an average as well. So primarily it has been used for compensation, performance improvement, feedback, documentation, promotion, training, transfer, discharge, layoff, personal research, and manpower planning as well. Now, there are few trends now you can observe in managing performance. Now, the first one is appraising and evaluating and managing performance. So, this two always we compare, and also another comparison, or you can say those two things are goes hand in hand. One is superior performance leads to superior rewards, but the issue is how to objectify measure specific goals. Now, who performs the appraisal? Obviously, the performance appraisal will be done by the immediate supervisor, then it will go to the higher management. Also, there has to be some involvement of this person himself for whom the appraisal is being happening, because he has to rate himself, and based on that, some of the calculation and understanding will happen. And also, the peers, the workers also will be involved in the feedback mechanism. The evaluation team can be there in a particular organization. The customers also can be involved, and if we involve all the stakeholders, it can be considered as a 360-degree appraisal. Now, if you are talking about supervisor appraisal, it is a performance appraisal done by an employee's manager and reviewed by manager one level higher. Then the next one is self-appraisal. Self-appraisal is the performance appraisal done by the employee being evaluated, generally on an appraisal form which has to be filled up by the individual himself for his own performance. Now the next one is subordinate appraisal. This appraisal is done by an employee which is more appropriate for developmental than administrative performance. So this is basically someone who is directly working with the particular person but at a higher level. And the next one is the peer appraisal. Peer appraisal is simply the person who is working at the similar level of the person, so can understand what exactly the person is doing, how much is helpful. So it's basically someone who is working in the same team on the similar domain at the similar level. The next one can be the team appraisal. So the performance appraisal based on the team performance, recognize the team accomplishment. So here not the individual performance, but the team performance would be considered. The next one is the 360-degree performance appraisal interview. So it starts from the individual for whom the performance appraisal is going to be started. Then other stakeholders who would be involved in the entire process would be immediate supervisor, other superiors, peers and customers, teams and subordinates as well. Now, what are the problems we face in performance appraisal? Now, there are certain things that's popularity contest. Like if a person is very popular, he may not be a great performer, but sometimes it has been biased by the popularity of the person. Punitive implications, control relinquishments. Sometimes if we know if we want to control something, we can sometimes affect our performance appraisal. Some stereotype performance appraisal method also can affect the performance appraisal methodology. So the person who is basically a high performer, the stereotype mechanism will not evaluate him properly. Poor training of raters, and if a performance appraisee is not rating properly, then also can be a problem. Now, peer appraisal concerns, what are the disadvantages and advantages? Rating error issues are there, like if we don't carefully develop behavior description, fair evaluation scales, and factor relatedness to the job. And there are types of rating errors. One is leniency or strictness error, one is central tendency, and one is recency error. So the leniency or strictness error is define a error, force the graph. Sometimes we always try to force something for the appraisal system and make it very generalized, which will affect the overall performance of a person who is very good performer will not be evaluated properly. Central tendency, reluctant to give high or low rating. So what happens, everyone falling into a general category, so there will be no difference between a high performer and a low performer. And recency error, sometimes we do the evaluation for the entire year, but sometimes the halo effects or an immediate performance of a person would be affected, which will may not be be suitable to evaluate the performance of the person for the entire year. Now, what is error of central tendency? Performance rating error in which an all boys are rated at average. So there is no difference between a high performer and a low performer, and which is very dangerous. Then the high performers would be demotivated, and low performers, if they don't get any messages to improve their performance, the overall productivity of the organization will decrease. What is leniency or strictness error? Performance rating error in which the appraiser tends to give employees either usually high or unusually low ratings. It depends on the person. Sometimes it happens a high performer team, because of the supervisor, is getting a very low rating. On the other hand, a very low performer team, because of the high rating of a supervisor, is getting a very high rating, which would be affecting the overall evaluation of the team. Now, what is recency error? Recency is performance rating error in which the appraisal is based largely on the employee's most recent behavior rather than behavior throughout the appraisal period. So, obviously, the overall evaluation is not happening for the employee, and which is extremely difficult to manage. Now the next one is rating it as example. So there are certain examples we can give. In case of halo, resiliency, central tendency, recency bias, the chart is been given to give the example. And similar to me error, so there is performance rating error in which an appraiser influence the evaluation of an employee because of mutual personal connection. So supervisor has a very good connection with the individual, will give a higher rating. Then the next one can be appraisal training program needs. So whenever you are implementing an appraisal or performance methodology, you have to give a proper training to all the particular individuals. So you need to explain the objectives, review the instruments, define the performance standards, understand the typical subjective errors, and teach the interviewing skills, which will give them the understanding how to evaluate or interview a person, to understand what exactly the person is doing and what are the expectations. The next one is scheduling the performance appraisal. Schedule the review and notify the employee 10 days or 2 weeks in advance, and ask the employee to prepare the session by reviewing his own performance. He should get a form where the job objectives, development goals, everything has to be filled up, and clearly state that this will be a formal annual appraisal, so the individual should be prepared before the interview. Now, preparing for the review for the performance appraisal. You need to review the performance documentation collected throughout the year. Be prepared to give specific examples of the above or below average performance. When a performance falls short of expectation, determine what change needs to be made. After the appraisal is written, set it aside for a few days and then review it again. Follow whatever the steps are required by your organization performance appraisal system. Now, appraisal interview. Obviously, this interview has to be scheduled 10 to 14 days in advance. Provide subordinate with a guide to follow in planning for the interview, and consider which of the following approaches to use: tell and sell method, tell and listen method, problem solving method. So, generally, the problem solving method is more preferable to get the full participation of the individual. Now the next one, we will explain what are the tail and sell interviews. It is the supervisor persuades employees to change in prescribed way. Employee sees how change behavior will be a great benefit. Now tell and listen interview. Supervisor covers strengths and weakness for the individual, solicits employees feeling about comments, deal with disagreement non-defensively, and negotiate future concrete objectives. Now, the problem solving interview is basically discuss strength and weakness, explore feeling subordinates, listening, accepting, discuss problems, innovation, listen and response with goal of helping the person. So, this is more collaborative and helpful nature. So, obviously, the participation and the success ratio of this particular interview would be higher. Now, how you should perform during the interview. During the interview, emphasize strengths to build on, suggest more acceptable ways of acting. The techniques you should follow: listen, use a variety of type of questions, and avoid sandwich technique. Now, the next one, establishing job related performance standards. You need to prepare a relevant, free from contamination, and reliable job related concern. Appraisal program failure concerns are there if there is little benefit related to time commitment, if the face to face confrontation is happening, unskilled appraisals are there, role conflict of an employee, this process can be failed. What are the different methods we follow? Number one is rating scale, number two is essay, number three is management by objectives or MOB, then number four is checklist by keywords, forced choice statements, ranking of employees. Go step by step to explain what are the different performance appraisal methods we generally follow. The first one is the rating scale methods, which is basically the most popular and most extensively used for performance appraisal. Now this is being measured for the total performance. So there are different types of scales available. One is the global scale, the next one is the mixed standard scale, and the third one is behaviorally anchored rating scale. So in a global scale, the total performance will be measured. In the mixed standard scale, it would be choose from different statements and different instances, and behaviorally anchored rating scale would be you choose between descriptions along the scale to define. The next one would be behaviorally anchored rating scale description or bars. Now here what we do, a behavioral approach to performance appraisal that consists of series of vertical scales, one for each important dimension of job performance. So say for example, you are working as a software engineer. Now as a software engineer, analytical skills, your sometimes client communication skills would be important. So obviously we will take such instances, and based on that the proper performance appraisal or evaluation will happen. Now there are some examples which can be given to elaborate the bars. Municipal fire companies. Now if you have there is a fire company which is a municipal fire company, and if you define what are the different high, average and low performance measurement, that low performance measurement will not change firefighting strategy in spite of flashbacks. Average can be built understanding basic hydraulics, who can understand and identify the location of the fire, who cannot tell the type of fire by observing the color of flame. The high would be finds the fire when no one else can, and correctly assess the basic point of the fighting fire. Uses type of smokes as indicator of type of fire. So basically, a person, what a kind of behavior or skill set he's exhibiting, based on that, the performance evaluation will happen. The next one is the graphic rating scale method. In a graphic scale rating method performance appraisal, whereby each employee is rated according to a scale of predefined characteristics that are job performance related. So there will be some predefined characteristic which is required to perform in the job, and based on that characteristics the evaluation will happen. There is a classical example which can be used for a graphic rating skill provision. Number one is knowledge of work. So how much you are knowledgeable about the work to perform the work, how much initiatives you can take to perform in the job. Application means how kind of attention and minute details orientation you have for this job. Quality of work, what kind of quality you are showing, what kind of what kind of performance you can. So here we will explain the graphic and rating scale with provision for comments, a sample form which can be used for the graphical rating. So number one is be the knowledge of work. So how much knowledge or understanding you have about the job. Then the initiatives, what kind of initiatives you are taking to become successful in the job, what kind of attention and minute detail orientation you have for this job, what is your quality of work, what kind of quality you are exhibiting, and definitely the volume or the quantity of work you are managing. So this kind of sample form can be used for the graphical rating scale. Now the next one is the first choice method, which is basically treat approach to performance appraisal that requires the rater to choose from statements designed to distinguish between successful and unsuccessful person. So basically it is like what are the traits that differentiate between a successful or a performer or an unsuccessful or a non-performer of a job. Now, if we go for the next method, which is known as essay method, is basically a trait approach to performance appraisal that requires the rater to compose a statement describing employee behavior. So it will be a kind of essay and description what the employee is doing, what the things he's thinking. So overall description about the nature and the kind of things or the performance has been exhibited by that particular employee. Now, what would be the method to write down an essay? It would be write a behavioral statement of that employee, strength versus weakness. So it can be like SWOT analysis, the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. Describe selected traits which is required to perform in that particular job and evaluate performance. Now we will go in the next step where it will be shown how a goal setting can be created, because that is one of the most important aspect of a performance evaluation process. You need to prepare a goal setting of any individual based on their level, based on their work, based on their department, and several other characteristics. And another important aspect that you need to understand, what are the training need for that person, and what are the career orientation, what would be the goal orientation for that person, where he needs to go, what should be the achievement of that person. Based on that, the goal setting has to be created. So you can use this kind of sample form, and also along with the goal you should always identify or create a goal setting evaluation methodology. Say for example, if you are saying for a software engineer how much bugs, for a software tester maybe is how many bugs he has identified in a particular scrum, so definitely that has to be identified by the numbers. So there has to be a proper evaluation, measurement, and a scale. Now I will give an example of mixed standard scale. So mixed standard scale can be starting from different things like problem solving, leadership, high cooperation, and normal cooperation, lead cooperation. So different kind of traits, different kind of behavioral pattern of that employee would be considered for the mixed standard scale. Now there will be another process that can be critical incident. Critical incident is basically unusual event that denotes superior or inferior employees performance in some part of the job. It's generally can be concluded that in a critical situation the performance or the real potential of an employee can be identified. So a person who is showing performance under high pressure, under critical situation, and also delivering properly, he is can be considered as a high performer employee with high potential. Now management by objective is basically philosophy of management that rates performance on the basis of employee achievement of goals set by mutual agreement of employee and manager. So this is basically a kind of goal setting methodology where the manager will set the goal along with the employee, and the employee agree to that, and based on the goal setting the evaluation will happen. The management by objective has been explained by Peter Drucker. He has explained the ingredients, performance of goal setting, and frequent intervals. What should be the intervals of the goal setting? How can you maintain the record and objective review jointly, the employee and the reviewer, and also mutual buy-in. So both the parties should agree. Now, what are the advantages of MBO? Now, MBO, here employees can measure performance. This is, there has to be quantifiable goals. So quantifiable goals is very useful for a performance measurement. It is a joint effort. So the employee and the employer, both of them are in agreement. So there will be more cooperation and acceptance as well. Employee satisfaction also will be there as they are participating actively in this particular exercise. But there are some disadvantages as well. The disadvantages are success not validates by research studies. So even if an employee is being considered as successful in management by objective methodology, sometimes it's not being validated by the research studies. It's easy to set unrealistic goals. Sometimes the managers or the employee both can set unrealistic goal which is may not be very relevant or maybe not at all relevant to the company as well. It's hard to get full commitment to process because obviously as is this mutual agreement, there is always a possibility that the employee will not give full commitment to this, and sometimes it's very difficult to define goals as well. Like there are some special function that has been done by the employee but which cannot be converted into measurable goals, but measurable goals is very important in case of management by objective methodology. Now what is the performance appraisal interview needs in case of management by objective and all? Now there has to be trained interview techniques, there has to be honest in appraisal, there has to be well planned structure. Without a proper planning, the performance appraisal interview will not be successful. It has to be carefully conducted. You need to understand the empathy of the employee, and also the feedback openness has to be there. You should not show any rigidness if the employee is giving any feedback, positive or negative. And it has to be adequate time bound, more than one session occasionally, because if the time bound is not there, it would not be successful. Now what is the procedure guidelines? In any interview of appraisal, you should always listen more than you talk. Also vary the questions. Sometimes it can be open-ended, sometimes it can be closed-ended. There should be some follow-up questions. There should be some reflect feelings. Avoid sandwich techniques. The positive, negative, positive. That kind of things will not be successful. So you should not ask why, because it signals bad news, and no more bad news. Discourage real communication. So basically, it has to be future communication. What kind of things you are thinking? What is the expectation? It has to be very clear. Now if we measure the overall performance at the end of this presentation, so it is something like this: organization common goals or measure of organizational performance has to be flowed towards the departmental specific goals. It has to be breakdown to that. So now from the department it has to be supervised list of goals and the subordinate purpose of goals. Now between the supervisor goals and the subordinate goals there has to be a mutual agreement, and then you create the goal setting. Now from the goal setting you periodic review of the feedback of the goal setting and feed the feedback to the employee, and then new inputs sometimes you can be provided, sometimes new inappropriate goals can be eliminated, and finally you review the subordinate result based on the goal setting. So this is the total way to measure the performance and which will lead the success of the organization, because without the performance of an employee or all the employees, an organization cannot be successful. So performance appraisal hereby can be considered as one of the most important aspects for the success of an organization. So here we are at the end of the PPT. So now there will be some examples as well. If you want to get that examples related to the form, any self-evaluation form, any other query, you can always reach to us, connect to the Facebook page, or maybe you can send an email to our mail ID. So hereby we are completing and saying bye to you all. And so happy success to your performance appraisal. Continue to evaluate all your employees at the right manner. Thanks for your listening.